Introducing aPriori.
Hi all, welcome to today's session on a guide to building better relationships with suppliers using digital factories. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ishan. I'm one of the product managers here at aPriori. I've spent my entire career so far in the software as a service and contract manufacturing worlds. My current focus as a product manager is looking at aPriori as a total solution across all of our products to help drive more growth and adoption within our customer base. Before joining the product team earlier this year, I worked with our contract manufacturing customers as a customer success manager, where I leveraged my background in quoting and business development at an online build-to-print shop called Fictive. My primary commodity for quoting was injection molding, with a focus on the aerospace, autonomous vehicle, and surgical robotics verticals. And being a two-sided house, I also source parts from our strategic suppliers here in the US as well as in China across all stages of our customers' hardware development lifecycle, from prototyping to mass production. Our topics for today are discussing the goals and outcomes of better relationships with your suppliers, an overview of digital factories, considerations for whether or not you want to build supplier digital factories, and the other ways to collaborate with suppliers using custom outputs and Watchpoint reports. In most cases, both OEMs and suppliers have similar goals in their working relationships. As an OEM, you want to ensure that you're not overpaying for what you source. You also want to reduce your risk by understanding more of the supplier's business and how they operate, ultimately leading to a beneficial impact on your overall time to market given today's supply chain conditions. So this means shortening the RFQ process, leading to a quicker start to the production of your parts and assemblies. As a supplier, you want to ensure that you're not getting underpaid for the business that you've won. In the contract manufacturing world, returning customers are worth their weight in gold, and having consistency in revenue from any given customer gives suppliers higher confidence and profitability. And lastly, as a supplier, you also want to have a quick turn on your quoting and ensuring that your forecasts match with the available capacity at your shops. For those of you new to aPriori or not as familiar with how the software is set up, here's a visual representation of how the software is set up, of the different components of digital factories. In a way, the overall digital factory is made up of smaller databases, which contain different pieces of data. You have your cost models representing the manufacturing processes required to make your parts, like injection molding, die casting, or machining. Then you have the machine's digital factory, which contains machine data like injection molding machines and presses, or even specific brands of milling machines and lathes. You also have the materials digital factory containing materials provided in our baselines or any additional materials that you can add for what you typically source. And lastly, the regional baselines, which contain economic data like labor and overhead rates and cost accounting logic around SG&A and margin. When our new OEM customers start using aPriori, the most common deployment methodology is to create a gold standard digital factory. This is meant to be versatile and representative of your entire supply base as opposed to a specific supplier's capabilities. Even within those gold standard digital factories, you as a customer and our implementation engineers are updating various pieces of information, most typically in these three areas here on the slide. First is the process capabilities and routing rules, where processes and routing selections are defined, along with machines and materials feasibility rules. Then there's the actual manufacturing, so the speeds and feeds, time standards, stock forms, etc. And lastly, the cost accounting data with the rates. All of these combined leads to that gold standard digital factory that you can use for should costing across your entire supply base, with the assumption that scenario overrides may need to be made to tailor any given scenario to any given supplier situation. That said, all of these three categories are what you'd be making updates to create supplier digital factories. Every version of aPriori includes baseline data that you can use or customize as needed. So as a new customer, you'd create a copy of the baseline cost model template as a starting point for your gold standard digital factory. And you could do this for all four of the categories here to the left. These copies that you make will typically be disassociated copies of the baselines. So that way, for example, with cost model logic or the cost model template, any cost model logic changes that you make, they wouldn't get lost when you upgrade to a new version of aPriori. Once you've created copies of the cost model template, machines database, materials database, you would then build the regional overlays containing the tool shop and economic data. In general, once customers have created their digital factories or their gold standard digital factories, the supplier versions will typically be copies of the gold standard with additional customizations. But you can choose to inherit everything from the baselines instead before making other customizations. And you also don't need supplier versions of everything, so you can pick and choose what to configure based on your situations. Here are some very high-level suggestions or decision criteria for what to update and why. The cost model template updates would typically be reserved for situations where supplier routings are substantially different than the supply base. You may also want to explore this if you do a significant amount of business with any given supplier to truly represent their facilities. And customizations to the cost model template also helps with automation. So if a supplier doesn't have 5-axis milling capabilities, you can choose to remove it as an option in that particular supplier digital factory, but preserving that in your gold standard digital factory for those suppliers who do have those capabilities. Updates to the materials database could be for cases where suppliers have preferred pricing with their own material vendors that they share with you. Updates to the machines database would be for cases where suppliers have different machines than what is available in the baselines. And these could be brands of mills or different tonnage presses. And the regional baseline updates would contain commercial data. So if you have a master service agreement or a long-term financial agreement with suppliers, the updates here would mean less overrides that you'd have to do on a scenario level for any given partner assembly. So now that you've hopefully have gotten an understanding of digital factories and how they're created, let's start exploring considerations for when to build supplier-specific digital factories. On a high level, the first question to answer is what your relationship is with the supplier and the scope of your typical RFQ with them. Are they just a commodity supplier for specific manufacturing processes for just parts, or do they handle more with sub-assemblies, assemblies, or even entire products? Next is how embedded are you already in each other's businesses? Do they scale up with you for new product introduction from low volume in early stages for decreasing their own learning curves all the way to production, or do you switch suppliers based on the typical supported volumes? And lastly, if you have that master service agreement or long-term financial agreement with the suppliers, it's a good leading indicator to explore this further with your supplier. And based on your answers here, your expert services consultants can help guide you on what the best path forward is. And if the decision comes out to not creating supplier digital factories, that's completely okay. And we have a few more slides on what the other options are for building better relationships with suppliers. Custom outputs are an area of our product that customers could be leveraging more. The screenshot example is from the injection molding cost model, and these are the nitty-gritty details that are all calculated behind the scenes to generate should costs and cycle times. These details also provide additional transparency to the supplier on how the should costs were calculated. In most cases, these custom outputs are contained in the operational database, which means that they're in an unstructured state. And to get them in a structured state, the custom outputs need to be exposed. So you're basically enabling them to be reported on in the reporting database. And once these custom outputs are exposed, add them to your Watchpoint reports, which I'll get into in the next slide. You can also choose to display them, which means they'll appear in the part details tab of AP Professional for your cost engineers. And by displaying them, you have the ability to override those specific values and recost based on supplier feedback. In general, the recommendation for custom outputs, whether you expose or display them, is to do it in your gold standard digital factories, since they can be used by anyone in your supply base. One of my favorite examples of custom outputs is around cycle times. So when you cost an injection molding part, you'll see what the cycle time is to produce that part. But within that cycle time, the three components for injection molding are the injection time, the cooling time, and ejection time. Exposing all three of those custom outputs and including them in the Watchpoint reports would give your suppliers visibility into how the total cycle time is calculated. Watchpoint reports contain the data that you choose to share with your suppliers, typically in Excel format. These are configured reports, so your expert services consultants can help you create those. And if you have custom outputs exposed or displayed, including these in the Watchpoint reports and sharing these with your suppliers as part of the bid package goes a long way in developing more trust and transparency with suppliers. And by giving them these reports, you're effectively quoting on behalf of suppliers with the assumptions properly surfaced. And you can give suppliers the ability to redline any of the provided data. And asking suppliers how they quote and what are the key pieces of information they use to quote can help drive what you decide to include in these reports. Watchpoints can also be used as a gateway to build supplier digital factories if you wish, since the insights provided by suppliers can help drive digital factory configurations. So based on the red lines that they do on these Watchpoint reports when they're giving it back to you. Suppliers would also appreciate more configurations to the Watchpoint reports. So as an example, if the Excel template that you send to them, the Watchpoint reports, if they can be formatted in a way that makes them more easily ingestible in their own business systems. So like if they can upload these reports to their CPQ or ERP systems, that's less time taken to return official quotes back to you. And using these reports also opens up conversations and topics that suppliers may initially be hesitant to discuss. So the supplier's routing, material utilization, or nesting strategies for sheet metal, as an example, are all suppliers' intellectual property. Their concern is going to be around how is the data that they provide to you going to be used? Will you, as the OEM, go to another supplier to see what their quoted prices are using the first supplier's methodology? Or will you just share that methodology with an existing supplier who's already producing these parts? These are fair concerns, but can be overcome by some of the overtures that you as the OEM makes with custom outputs and Watchpoint reports. And ultimately, the end result of all of this is to bridge the gap, if any, between your should costs and their quoted prices to achieve the fair price both the OEM and suppliers are looking for. And as a closing slide, here is a chart to help summarize the suggestions for your digital factory or scenario customization strategy. The x-axis is the level of complexity or effort of configuration and maintenance for all of the topics that we discussed today. The y-axis is the depth of the relationship you have with the supplier. Scenario overrides are low effort. Exposing or displaying custom outputs takes a little bit more effort, and configuring Watchpoint reports takes a bit more effort beyond that. On the digital factory side, updating the regional baselines for economic or commercial data, as well as updating the machines and materials databases for your suppliers, is relatively low-hanging fruit if you wanted to pursue this option. Updating the baseline cost model template for your suppliers does take time, but less overall than creating your gold standard digital factory in the first place. And all the way on the top right-hand corner is that fully tuned supplier digital factory. That concludes our presentation for today. Hope you enjoyed. Please reach out if you have any questions.
aPriori, making profitability and sustainability a reality for a better world.